Today, Guahusi Moñeka Giro Genenias Las Marianas, Gi Entalui Pacificu, Chmorozu, Gi Tatatanu, y Estas Marianas. My name is Moñeka Dioro. I am a Chamorro woman from the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the Marianas, from the islands of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. And I have been working with Climate Justice Alliance as a Just Transition Fellow since 2019. And I also lead a member organization of Climate Justice Alliance called Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, where we really ground in the work of the just transition and create community-based solutions to the climate crisis, as well as build and amplify the regional voice of Micronesia to the issues that are impacting us so desperately already around the threats of climate change and the harms that this is causing to our environments and to our communities. Climate justice, to me, is the intersection of all the injustices and the oppression that many people of color, indigenous people, Black folks have all experienced with this oppressive, extractive way of being via colonialism and greed and violence and struggle for power and dominance over others that has been going on since really the dawn of the opening up of the New World, and even before that. Really, it's a change in a value system, and it's the acknowledgement that indigenous peoples and many other peoples of color have been caretakers of the land and protectors of our waters, and the systems that value profit and greed that have harmed our environments, have harmed our communities, are the same at the root cause of the climate crisis. And these economic injustices and all these other forms of injustices are just woven into the same sort of system of extraction and of greed. And climate justice is really about healing. It's really about restoring good relationships with our natural environment and being a good neighbor and good to ourselves and to our bodies and to those around us, and just being in better relationships in general. Climate justice really is about restoring past harms, and it really is about figuring out a new, more regenerative, more feminist way of having an economy that respects and honors Mother Earth, and respects and honors women, and respects and honors people of color, and really puts the people at the forefront of climate change, the frontline communities, at the head of the table to decide and design solutions, and at the head of the table to really implement those solutions. And as we see it now, COP26 is happening. We don't have a seat at the table at these sorts of discussions, and it's the polluters and it's the state actors and leaders who are continuously trying to move false solutions and market-based strategies to bring any sort of resolution to the climate crisis that we're facing across the globe. And these things are so shallow, so short-sighted, and still profit-driven. And we don't need profits. We need deep ideological shifts in humanity. We need an awakening of our spirits to really shift the paradigms and the ways that we interact and trade with one another, and really go back to ancestral indigenous values and wisdoms to drive that. And that's what climate justice is to me. And for us out here in the Pacific Islands, we're thousands of miles away from any continental base, and with the threat of sea level rise, we are already seeing our shores wash away. We're already seeing, in my lifetime in the village that I grew up in Talafofo, Guam, I've seen over 500 feet of beach line erode. And one of my favorite beaches in Talafofo Bay, we are seeing and experiencing an increase in cyclones, and feeling the warming weather. Literally, our summers are hotter than they've ever been before, and we're feeling and the oceans feel that too, and we see coral bleaching and the loss of our coral reefs at an exponential rate, so much more than any other generation has observed before. The storms that we get are becoming stronger, and they're becoming more frequent. We're in Typhoon Alley, so we get typhoons all the time, but they're just becoming so much more unpredictable and strengthening at speeds that we've never witnessed before. I'm on the island of Saipan, and just 3 years ago, almost exactly, we were hit with one of the biggest storms to ever hit the earth, called Super Typhoon Yutu, and it devastated our community, and it took years to rebuild. And some people are still living in those FEMA tents 3 years later. We're in a dire situation throughout the Pacific. We have low-lying atolls in the rest of Micronesia, from the Marshall Islands to the Federated States of Micronesia, whose islands are no more than 3 meters above sea level. And with the recent IPCC report, it's pretty likely that in the next generation, maybe 2 generations, those islands will be submerged, and those people whose lands are so connected to their identities will lose one of their greatest sense of who they are. And no one should ever have to be a climate migrant or refugee. And that's a real reality for us out here in the Pacific. We are trying to fortify our shorelines with using traditional methods. We are seeing lots more communities plant mangroves and other salt tolerant species to increase their resilience. We're seeing so much work being done to build food sovereignty and to promote local farmers and the use of local produce, and protect our fisheries, and introduce other forms of having foods readily available out here on our islands. Because of colonization, majority of what we eat is imported. 90% of what we eat in the Mariana Islands is imported. And if climate disasters continue at the rate that they have been for here and other places in the world, it's just going to be even more constrained and more hard for us to continue to be dependent on food sources not made here in our region. So we're doing so much work to fortify and become resilient in our communities, but it really is mute if the largest contributors to the climate crisis aren't taking their fair share of responsibility and aren't helping those most impacted by climate change mitigate and adapt to those impacts. And if those same polluters aren't being held accountable, one of the biggest issues that we see here in the Marianas is that the military, who is actively destroying and actively threatening our livelihoods by building up their military forces here in the Marianas, are not being held accountable to the global climate accords according to the Paris Agreement. These important measurements of accountability are exempting the military, and the US military alone contributes the most amount of global greenhouse gases. It is the #1 consumer of fossil fuels and is the #1 polluter in the world, and is currently exempt from all climate measurements of accountability. And that is extremely problematic, and that is a huge injustice, because they're doing so much to destroy forests, aquifers, and our reef systems by expanding their training here to thwart off threats from countries in Asia. And so our islands are constantly being sacrificed for wars, and so are our bodies, and so is our waters. And it's really unfortunate that we here in the Marianas are still basically colonies of the United States of America, and we really don't have free will or informed and free and prior and informed consent to address these injustices that continue to happen, and address these polluters, and address and hold those forces accountable to the ecological harms that they're causing and the harms that they're causing to human health in our region. And that's one thing that I think has missed the mark incredibly in the climate justice movement, is that we aren't, and well, I'm seeing it this year at COP, that there's so much more being done to ring the alarm on militarism and militarization, and them and that whole industry and that whole industrial complex accountable to really shifting away that resource, because the US military is funded so generously by the US government, and we give more money to that entity than most other public services, and we give more money to that entity than all the 26 other nations below us combined give to their militaries. So it really shows what the priorities are for the United States. And it always has been war. It's a country founded on war. It's a country that constantly proliferates war. And it's a country that has sacrificed my islands, my peoples, my oceans for their quest of dominance. And it's something that definitely needs more attention, especially from those within the United States. I love these 4 Rs. I think that they really all do work in tandem with one another to address the climate crisis and to bring justice to the communities who have suffered the most from colonialism and from the oppressive forces that drive climate change and that continue to harm our communities. The one that I feel most connected to right now, even though I dabble in a little of all of them, is possibly reimagine and envisioning that new just system, and really trying to embody in my own personal life and for the children that I have and one that's on the way, of a new world for them. I don't want to, as an indigenous person, I constantly think about my ancestors and want to make them proud, and really want to follow their leads. For Chamorro people, we see our ancestors as before us and as guides for us, and not people who existed in the past, but those learning from their wisdom and learning for their gifts of how they steward our land and how they protected our culture against colonization over the last 500 years. They definitely are a source of great resilience and strength for us as indigenous peoples, and definitely reimagining a world that honors those energies and honors and gives ceremonial priority to ancestors and to the rituals that we carry every single day is really important to me. And uplifting cultural traditions through media work and through my academic work has been really important for so many years now, and I've continuously held to this vision of wanting to honor my ancestors and actively and having that be a part of the process of how I act for my descendants. And doing that really has been such an enriching experience. It makes me prioritize working with elders. It really does expand my ideas of what is possible for a new world by really honoring the past worlds and the worlds that have been threatened with this current dominant, hegemonic force that exists and has taken over the world in so many ways. So that reimagining peace and holding strong to a vision of justice, of equity, and of harmony with our natural resources and with our relations of all kinds is definitely something that brings me a lot of hope. Is I find something in those sort of spaces that prioritize that to be really revitalizing, and really just uplifts my spirit and the spirits of all those involved. And I think that's really important, to create those spaces and to cultivate ways of being that honor the sacred and really just be in better relations as an individual, and hoping to see that ripple effect happen around me. So yeah, I think that's the answer, but I do appreciate all the other R's and work in tandem with all of them, and definitely see this reimagining space and the visionary space as what I call feel more purposeful in doing.